let's go right ahead and talk about Scottie Barnes' injury. Now, if you guys have been tuning in for a while, you guys know that I'm really high on Scottie Barnes. I really like Scottie Barnes as a player. I really encourage all of you to pick him for fantasy, and apparently the basketball gods have heard me talk about him highly, and they decided, whoop, now it's time for him to get hurt. It just always happens. I'm sorry if you guys ended up listening to me and picking Scottie Barnes for your fantasy team. I have failed you, but in hindsight, I mean, I can't predict injuries. No one can predict injuries. And there was no way I would have been able to know that Scottie Barnes could have gotten injured in any game. I mean, there's obviously a chance for that, but given how he doesn't really have that strong of an injury history, given how he was able to play in a majority of the games last season before getting injured, because he did get injured last season, I don't think that was a really tough concept to believe in with Scottie Barnes. And I know I ended up being wrong with picking him for fantasy because he is probably going to be injured for a long time. The Raptors announced on Wednesday that Scottie Barnes sustained a right orbital fracture on Tuesday by way of Nikola Jokic's elbow. And this might not sound really good for the Raptors, but this might be a blessing in disguise. Now, what do I mean by that? So, Barnes, he's going to be reevaluated in 3 weeks, and, hold on just 1 second, and it'll cover 12 games at minimum. So that's going to be at least 12 games where he doesn't play at the very least, right? And until he gets reevaluated. So, Toronto is already 1-3, one of the league's third worst point differential at minus 8.8. And their only win came against the 76ers that did not have Joel Embiid and Paul George. So, basically, Toronto is not good this year. And I didn't expect them to be good, let alone be good with Scottie Barnes. I don't expect them to be good without Scottie Barnes anymore anyways. So, I think now the next step for the Raptors is to try and... I hate saying this, but it's to tank. I mean, this might seem like the best possible move for them at this point. It's for a good reason. So maybe they make the play-in tournament, but the 2025 draft class is loaded with talent. They're going to have even beyond Cooper Flagg, who was just ranked as the best college basketball player in the recent ESPN rankings. And aside from Flagg, the rest of the draft class is going to have so much talent, way more talented than the previous draft class that with Zachary Rasacher, Alexander Sarr, Bronny James, just to name a few. And I feel at this point, given that we know how competent that draft class is, maybe now would be a good time to tank and try to get a high pick in the draft. And they should be using this absence as a way to accumulate as many losses as possible with a built-in excuse. Because here, our best player isn't playing in these games. So there's no real expectations for the Raptors to really do anything in this regular season, let alone do anything in the postseason. So it might be tanking time. It might be tanking time for the Raptors. Nobody likes to hear that word, honestly. In saying it is I really don't like that thought process at all. I mean, intentionally losing games and purposely trying to lose games, I don't really feel like that's something that that is good for the integrity of the game. But this is why the draft lottery is the draft lottery, so that way it sort of discourages people from tanking. And it discourages teams from tanking and discourages them from being able to... There's no real guarantee that you'll land the number one pick in the draft if you do tank and be the worst team in the NBA. We've seen that 2 years in a row with the Detroit Pistons, where they were the worst team in the NBA, but they still only ended up getting the fifth pick in the draft, and twice. So it's a little bit of a risk, but given how talented this draft class is expected to be, I don't think it's really that big of a deal. Like, if you don't get the number one pick, then you could get, even at the fifth pick, you'll probably still be able to get a solid player in this draft class if you end up picking right, obviously, and if that player ends up developing into the player that we expect them to be, because we know things happen. And there's a lot of things that is unclear when drafting rookies, so not everything is guaranteed, right? But as of right now, the league, it's been trying to flatten the lottery odds to take away at least some of the incentive to pursue losing as a means of better draft picks. But it no longer does you any good to be the absolute worst team in the league, right? Rather, as long as you're one of the worst 3 teams, you have the same 14.5% chance at landing a top pick, as the article continues saying. So, like they say about teams gunning for the top of the standings, games in November count the same as the games in March and April. By the time the calendar flips and after All-Star break, there are going to be a lot of teams who will be less interested in winning, for lack of a better term. Because given their standings, given the competitiveness of the Western Conference and the competitiveness of the Eastern Conference, they might already see, like, okay, this is not, we're not going to be able to do much in the postseason, probably not going to do much in the play-in either, so we might as well go ahead and try and get a higher pick in the draft. No need to try and win and get a higher pick in the draft, which, again, most people don't really like that because it encourages a bit of a losing attitude, and I understand that. That's not something that you want to constantly be doing, but Toronto is most likely, with this injury, they could get a head start in that race to being one of the bottom teams in the next 3 weeks. And it's worth it as of this rate. We all know about the talent of Cooper Flagg, but it goes beyond, as most experts believe that there are at least 5 players in the 2025 draft that could go to the number 1 overall pick in last year's draft class. Like, if they were drafted last year, a lot of people expected they would be the number 1 pick in the draft, because we know that last year's draft class was relatively weak. And it really stinks that this is how the system works, but until it changes more than a little bit of odds flattening, it really sort of it allows the Toronto Raptors, with control of all of its first round picks through 2031, plus Indiana's first round pick in either 2026, which is a top 5 projected, or a 2027 from Pascal Siakam, to think long term about these sort of moves and to think about tanking. Now, Barnes is already an all-star, but he does not project to be a guy who can outright carry a team anywhere meaningful. He needs a big-time help, and outside of trading a bunch of those draft assets for a current star, that doesn't really fit Toronto's current timeline. So right now, it would seem like they would be looking towards the draft, and I think the draft would be the best move for Toronto at this point. Again, I'm very, very sorry for any of you guys who have picked Scottie Barnes for fantasy. I really was expecting a very solid season for him, but now that he's going to be out for a couple of games, that doesn't really seem to be the case. So I apologize for that. But at the end of the day, what can you do? And that's really all that I have to say about this show. Let me know in the about this segment. Excuse me. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of this, and let me know if you guys think that you should, whether or not the Raptors should be tanking, whether or not the Raptors should be just continuing to try and win, whether or not the Raptors should trade. Let me know what you guys think. So that's all that I have in this second segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the third segment, where I talk about Wemby versus Chet Holmgren. This was an extremely anticipated matchup between these two towers of centers that the NBA has now. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that right after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.